Imagine being one of the first humans to step foot into a place that no one had ever been before. Not just any place but a station built above Earth, high in the black void of space. Now, take that feeling of awe and uncertainty and multiply it by 100. This was the reality for the astronauts aboard Skylab, NASA's first space station, an ambitious project that would come to define both the promise and the peril of human exploration in space. Skylab was an extraordinary journey, one that most people forget today, but it deserves to be remembered, not only for its scientific milestones but for the very human triumphs and struggles that defined its existence. The story of Skylab began in the early 1960s when the United States was locked in a fierce competition with the Soviet Union. The Cold War had turned space exploration into the ultimate race for technological dominance. The Russians had already achieved incredible feats, including launching the first artificial satellite, Sputnik, in 1957, and sending the first human, Yuri Gagarin, into orbit in 1961. In response, America pushed forward with its space program, focusing on sending astronauts to the moon. But there was another, quieter ambition brewing: a permanent human presence in space. The idea of a space station was not new. Both the Soviets and Americans had dreamed of creating a base for astronauts to live and work in low Earth orbit. NASA's answer to this challenge was Skylab. Unlike the towering monuments to engineering like the Saturn V rocket, Skylab wasn't about sheer size and spectacle. It was a test of endurance and survival. Could humans live and work in space for extended periods, conduct meaningful scientific experiments, and return to Earth safely? Skylab would answer these questions. Skylab wasn't built in the traditional sense of constructing a massive space station in orbit. Instead, it was a converted Saturn V rocket stage, a hulking cylindrical structure that was modified to house scientific equipment and crew accommodations. Inside there were rooms for eating, sleeping, and conducting experiments, while outside, solar panels and delicate scientific instruments stretched across its surface, ready to collect data from the stars and planets. On May 14, 1973, Skylab was launched into orbit aboard a Saturn V rocket from Kennedy Space Center in Florida. It was a historical moment. The American public had been watching the space race for over a decade, and now, finally, the dream of a space station had come to fruition. The rocket roared to life, pushing Skylab into space, leaving behind a trail of smoke and flame. But even as Skylab reached orbit, things didn't go exactly as planned. Upon reaching space, Skylab's solar panels, which were critical for its power supply, failed to deploy properly. This was a serious problem. Without those solar panels, Skylab would not be able to power the life support systems or the scientific instruments inside. The engineers on the ground at NASA's Mission Control Center in Houston faced a crisis. Would Skylab survive? But this wasn't just a moment for engineers. This was a moment for human ingenuity and creativity. The mission planners and ground crews at NASA scrambled to come up with a solution, and within days they came up with a plan. A team of astronauts who had been trained for this moment would be sent up to Skylab on a rescue mission to fix the damaged panels. The first crew to head to Skylab were astronauts Pete Conrad, Joseph Kerwin, and Paul Weitz. On May 25, 1973, they launched aboard the Skylab space station's first crewed mission, Skylab 2. The tension was palpable as they approached the station, unsure of what to expect. Their mission wasn't just about repairing solar panels, it was about survival. They had to make the station livable again. They would be the ones to face the challenges that no one had foreseen, and it was on their shoulders that Skylab's future rested. As the crew approached Skylab, they saw the damage firsthand. The solar panels had been torn, and the space station's skin was covered in layers of debris. They could see the dark, imposing structure that had become their new home. What followed was a tense and meticulous series of repairs. Conrad, with his calm and steady demeanor, took the lead, while Kerwin and Weitz worked alongside him to get Skylab back in working order. 4 days they performed painstaking repairs, using tools and techniques that had never been tested in space before. The moment that followed, when Skylab's solar panels finally deployed successfully, was one of pure triumph. It was as if the station itself had come to life again, powered by the ingenuity of the crew and the people on Earth. But that was just the beginning of Skylab's history. The crew would spend 28 days aboard the space station, conducting scientific experiments, repairing and maintaining the station, and testing the limits of human endurance in space. They made significant discoveries about how the human body reacts to weightlessness and how long periods of space exposure could affect astronauts' health. The crew not only kept Skylab alive, they also paved the way for future space stations like the International Space Station, which continues the legacy of Skylab's groundbreaking work. Skylab's next mission, Skylab 3, launched in 1973 as well, with astronauts Gerald Carr, William Pogue, and Edward Gibson aboard. Their mission was to continue conducting experiments, focusing on solar observations and studying the effects of space travel on human bodies. The trio spent 84 days in orbit, and this mission would set the record for the longest time a human crew had ever spent in space at that point. These astronauts' experiences aboard Skylab were a mix of awe and hardship. Weightlessness was disorienting at first, and the confinement of the station was a challenge. Every meal had to be carefully prepared and consumed in the zero-gravity environment. They were in a constant state of controlled chaos. But they were pioneers, each one aware that they were not only contributing to the space program but also to history itself. Skylab became more than a space station to them. It was their home, their laboratory, their testing ground. The third crewed mission, Skylab 4, launched in November 1973 with astronauts Jerry Carr, Bill Pogue, and Ed Gibson. They spent a record 84 days aboard Skylab. Their experiments ranged from solar observations to medical tests. They were pushing the limits of what humans could endure in space, and the data they collected would prove invaluable to future space missions. But despite all of the progress, the reality of Skylab's limitations was beginning to take hold. By 1974, Skylab's future was uncertain. There had been several technical setbacks, including a malfunctioning communications system and the gradual degradation of the station's life support systems. Skylab's orbit was slowly decaying, and there were fears that it would fall back to Earth sooner than expected. NASA had always planned on using Skylab for a maximum of 10 years, but as the 1970s wore on, Skylab's time was running out. The station was starting to show its age, and NASA faced a tough decision. Should they continue to fund Skylab's operations, or let it burn up in the Earth's atmosphere? In the end, Skylab was abandoned in 1974. Its final mission had been completed, and there was no immediate plan to send another crew to the space station. NASA had shifted its focus to the development of the Space Shuttle program, which would be able to deliver astronauts to space stations on a more regular basis. But Skylab's story didn't end there. In 1979, the space station was set to re-enter Earth's atmosphere. The problem was that nobody knew exactly when or where it would fall. The possibility of debris crashing to Earth caused concern for many, but in the end, Skylab re-entered the atmosphere on July 11, 1979, and disintegrated over the Indian Ocean and sparsely populated parts of Western Australia. Skylab, which had once been the pinnacle of space exploration, was now little more than a pile of burning metal scattered across the ocean. Its legacy, however, was anything but forgotten. Skylab had changed the course of space exploration forever. It had provided invaluable data, tested new technologies, and proved that humans could live and work in space for extended periods of time. Skylab wasn't just a forgotten relic, it was the foundation for everything that came after it. Today, the lessons learned from Skylab are still being applied to space missions. The astronauts who lived and worked on Skylab were pioneers. They faced challenges that were unknown to anyone before them. They not only survived in space but thrived in ways that would have been thought impossible only a few years earlier. Their story is one of human resilience, determination, and courage, a story that still echoes in the halls of NASA, in the spacecraft that fly to distant planets, and in the dreams of explorers who look up at the stars and wonder what lies beyond. Skylab might be a forgotten space station, but its impact will never be forgotten.